Good morning, Chag Sameach, Moray Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are going to focus a little bit on one point that we learned on Daf Memhei Amud Bet, and we promised that we're going to come back to it. Be'ezrat Hashem. So today we're going to focus on the last Gemara about Rebbi Shimon bar Yochai that we learned. This Amud is being learned as a schud refuah shalama for Rachel Simcha bat Nahid, for Michael ben Nahid, for Rabbi Avraham ben Tashgol. That should all have refuah shalama be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This week's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Shea family, Dayan family, Kohen family. This should be an ultimate schud for all their mishpachot be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. So we said in the Gemara, this is about 15 lines down from the top of the Amud. The Amar Chizkiah, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Mishum Rebbi Shimon ben Yochai. Chizkiah said in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Yachol ani liftor et kol ha'olam kulo min hadin. I can patter up the entire world from judgment. I could patter up the entire world from judgment from the day that I was born, miyom shenivreti ad ata, until today. In other words, all of the averot that the Reshaim have done, imagine worldwide we're talking about now. So Rashi says, Bizchuti ani sovel kol avonotehem. I could tolerate all of the averot upotran minatin, and I will patter them up from the din of Shamayim. He goes on and says, if my son Elazar is going to be with me, ve'ilmale Elazar beni imi, if my son Rabbi Elazar is also with me together, miyom shenivra ha'olam ad achshav. All of a sudden, it's not just my lifetime, but now it's going to be from the day that the world was created until today. Ve'ilmale Yotam ben Uziyahu imanu, and if Yotam ben Uziyahu Melech Yisrael will be with us, then we could do it miyom shenivra ha'olam ad sofo. We could patter up the whole world from the day that the world was created until the end of all time. Meaning you have no judgment. Chazaku Baruch. 3 people take on the whole world. That would be awesome, right? By the way, the Ben Ish Chai says, if you can't do it, so why didn't they? Right? That's an obvious question. The Ben Yoyada asks this question. He says, you see from here that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not want him to do that. He didn't want him to use his chuyot and to create that level of imbalance, so to speak, in the world. But the schuyot that he has is mentioned in the Gemara. Well, who is Yotam ben Uziyahu, by the way? Now, Yotam ben Uziyahu is Melech Yehuda. He was one of the most righteous individuals. He's the only king that is mentioned in Divrei Yamim that didn't do anything wrong. Right? Take a look at Rashi over here. Yotam ben Uziyahu tzaddik haya. Ve'anav yoter misha'ar melachim. He was more humble than other kings. Now, on one account is the fact that you will never find him doing anything wrong. And he says at the end, here Rashi, I'm skipping Rashi, Lo natal alav keter malchut bechayav. He never took any kavod of a melech in his lifetime. We're going to go back to the middle of Rashi to see why not. And as we mentioned, in Sefer Divrei Yamim, he is the only one that nothing wrong is mentioned. No wrongdoing has been mentioned by Yotam ben Uziyahu. Now, even David HaMelech was so beloved to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Well, we have moments that Hashem was not happy with him, right? In more than one occasion, obviously everyone thinks of the story of Uriah Hittite and his wife Bathsheba that David HaMelech married, and the way he came across was not pleasant to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem sends the Navi, Natan HaNavi, to chastise David HaMelech for marrying Bathsheba the way he did, even though the Gemara says, Kol ha'omer David chata eno ela to'eh. If you think that David HaMelech sinned, you are making a mistake. And the Gemara goes to explain that Kol ha'yotze le'milchemet bet David get keritot haya noten le'ishto, that she was a divorcee and hence available for David HaMelech to marry, and so on. After all, she is the mother of Shlomo Melech, the great-grandmother of Mashiach, and obviously, if she would not be muteret, right, she would be asura leba'alu leboel, she would be not allowed, not permissible for David HaMelech to marry. Certainly, a king, certainly Mashiach would not be coming from that type of marriage, that type of union. So, the Gemara, on the fundamental basis, answers the actions of David HaMelech, but the optics or the way it came across was not necessarily the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu was happy with it. He got punished. He did tshuva for a lifetime. He lost 4 of his children, as Natan HaNavi told him. He says, Natan HaNavi comes to him. This is, by the way, one of the greatnesses of David HaMelech, if we may open a parenthesis here, what sets him apart from Shaul HaMelech, because when Shaul HaMelech was approached by Shmuel, indicating that he sinned, Shmuel does not accept it. Not once, not twice, not 3 times. Right? He says, I shamati bekol Hashem. I did listen. He says, you didn't listen. He says, no, I did. No, you didn't. And he's going back and forth with him until at the end, he's proven wrong, and he says, yes, chatati ki areti et ha'am. I listened to the voice of people because I was afraid of them, and he deviated from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's din. And Shmuel in kind answers him, that kara Hashem mamlechut Yisrael ma'alecha. Hashem tore away the kingship of Klal Yisrael from you and gave it to your friend who's better than you. Right? Even though that talking about a sinless, humble individual, talking about Yotam ben Uziyahu, Shaul HaMelech was exactly that. Ben Shana Shaul b'molcho, the pasuk says, and Chazal darshin, just like a 1-year-old baby who is free of sin, Shaul HaMelech was pure like that. And he was talking about Anava. He was nechbe lakelim. When they announced him king, they couldn't even find where he is, because he was hiding somewhere. He didn't want to become a king. He didn't want to accept that kavod. But once he was up there, it became very difficult, and the rest is history. Whereas David HaMelech, when he is approached, and he is well into his malchut, he has a stronghold, and he is David Melech Israel. And when Natan HaNavi comes to him, he doesn't even have to tell him you sinned. He says it to him with a story of a wealthy man who lived neighboring a poor man, and the wealthy man had thousands of cattle and sheep, and the poor man only had 1 sheep that he raised as a pet. It was like his daughter. He ate with him in the same place. He slept on his bed. He was all he had. And it says Natan HaNavi, this rich man has a party, he invites his friends, and instead of taking one of his own cattle, he took and shechted the only sheep that this poor neighbor had, and fed it to his guest. What's the halacha? And David HaMelech, being the just person that he was, he turned red. He gets up from his throne. He says, Chai Hashem, ki ben mavet ha'ishahu. He says, I swear this person is Chayab Mita. And Natan HaNavi says, okay, come down from your high horse, so to speak. Ata ha'ish, you're that man. Because the analogy is very clear. You have so many wives, you could marry anybody. You're Melech Israel. This man only had this one person. Now they were divorced, fine. They're hoping to come back alive from the milchama and marry his wife again, and so on. And he took that away from him in a slick way. it's not something that I didn't expect that from you. Now, before he even says anything, before any explanation, the Melech gets up from his throne, comes down. Imagine this in front of the palace. The entire cabinet of David HaMelech is there. And he gets up, he falls to the floor, and his face says, Chatati LaHashem. So I sinned. I take full responsibility. And just like the halacha is, if a person steals a sheep, right, and shachts it, and then is found guilty, he has to pay arba yeshalem tachat haseh. He has to pay 4. And 4 of David HaMelech's kids in his lifetime were killed. Obviously, it was Amnon, Avshalom, right, Adoniyahu, and that very baby that was born from the initial marriage of David HaMelech and Bathsheba that got sick and died, despite David HaMelech's fasting and crying and sitting on the floor and so on and so forth, right? So that's David HaMelech. So even with all of his greatness, the greatness of David HaMelech was accepting guilt and being so honest with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and so on. Yotam ben Uzziah, we don't find him doing anything wrong. But it's not only that. He was very humble. And this is what happened. His father, Uzziah, was punished by Sarat, right? There's a Rash, without getting into too much of the detail of what happened with him. He was punished that he became a Metzorah, and he would not be able to face the nation in the way a king would. He was quarantined for the rest of his life. He never was healed from his Sarat. Yotam ben Uzziah grew up in this situation. He was crowned king, but he never wore the crown of a king. He did all of the responsibilities of a king. He executed properly and honestly everything that a king has to do, took the acharayut of an entire country upon himself. He can imagine, right? You can imagine what it means to be, and he's accepted 0 credit. 0 credit. He never benefited. These 3 people, the Mefarshim say, these 3 people are 3 individuals in Jewish history that never benefited from their credit, never took credit for anything in their life. Right? Rebbi Shimon bar Yochai, Rabbi Lazar Beno, and Yotam ben Uzziah. So what would he do? He had the psak that needed to be signed by the king, right? He had a cabinet meeting. He would do all of the legwork. He would sign his father's name on it. His entire life, the decades, the years, all the years that Yotam ben Uzziah was king and Uzziah was alive, that's what he did. And Chazal say on that, al zeh ne'emar, ben yechabed av. When the pasuk says, ben yechabed av, the son respects his father. The zchut of Yotam ben Uzziah, you wonder what the zchut he had, that if he adds up together with Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and Rabbi Lazar Beno, that they could patter up the whole world. Now imagine, up until Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and up until now, the billions of people that we have, and it probably is even with the type of averot in the recent history, probably you need more of a weight than Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai over here, including his son. Yotam ben Uzziah is the one that gives us until the end of all generations. And I'll now read back from Rashi. Shekol hayamim. He says this was Zacha v'kibud av aviv ve'alav ne'mar. He was zocher to a tremendous level of kibud av, and on him it says ben yechabed av. Shkol hayamim shaya aviv metzorah. All of the days that Uzziah was a metzorah, hu haya shofet am haaretz, he would do the chores of a king, the judging and all those things. Ve'yotam lo natal alav keter malchut. He did not accept a crown of a king. V'chayav v'kol dinin shayadan omran b'shem aviv. Even when you had to give a psak din, said my father paskin like this, even though that he was doing it, right? He would go learn Torah from him, the way he was allowed to, with the restrictions of a mesorah, and he made somebody that was, because mesorah is one of the 4 people who was considered dead, because he's completely excommunicated. You can imagine. he literally revived the life and the dignity of his father as a king. So that was so tremendous. The kibbud avayim, right? The kibbud avayim that he had was so tremendous that he is added as the third leg of this tremendous zchut for all of Klal Yisrael that could be patterning up the whole world from din. Now, what does this mean, right? What does it mean that I could pattern them up? So the way Rashi says it, it almost sounds like the difficulties that Rabbi Shimon Yochai accepted upon himself, right? It could pattern up the world. We find Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon Yochai, in Masechet Succah that he did the same thing. He actually would bring Yisurim upon himself on a daily basis, right? He had an incident. He was appointed by the king as the head sheriff of the region, and he had to kill people sometimes. He had to give them in. And one incident was someone that was not so clear, and ever since then, the Gemara says that he accepted upon himself this Yisurim, that every night that he would go to sleep, he would bring upon himself all this malachei chabala, the negative malachim, and the Gemara says maybe in the language of exaggeration that they would take from underneath him 60 sheets filled with pus in infection every night, right? And he had to eat certain food, and his wife at some point grew frustrated with it. They said, because she didn't realize that he's doing it to himself. In the morning, he would wake up and say, okay, at night, he would say, come to this malachim. And in the morning, say, okay, go away, now I need to learn, right? And when she got the wing of this, she was very upset. She said, well, you're finishing all my father's money for things that you're doing it to yourself. I didn't realize you're doing this. And she left. She was very unhappy. And obviously, the Gemara says that day, people who were saved in the zchut of mentioning the name of Rebbi Shimon from a tremendous danger in the sea trip that they were in, and their ship was about to break, and miraculously mentioning his name, they came and they brought him, many dozens of shvachot and tremendous amounts of money. So when the wife came after a few days to check on him, it was like all these people are working for him, and obviously when HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants something to happen, it happens. Not getting into the dialogue that they had and so on. But that's Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli and his son. Now, speaking about this, we definitely also, as we are counting the Omer, and we are days away from the legacy of Rabbi Shimon Yochai, which is celebrated on Lag BaOmer, it's definitely befitting to speak a little bit about Rabbi Shimon Yochai. First of all, one of the things that people think is that Lag BaOmer is the Hilulah of Rabbi Shimon Yochai. And we celebrate it because that's celebrating his legacy, right? But that's the yortzeit of Rabbi Shimon Yochai. If you ask the regular commoner, when is the yortzeit of Rabbi Shimon Yochai, they will tell you that it is on Lag BaOmer. Now, you'll forgive me if I bring to your attention that perhaps never happened, right? Because the whole thing may be based on a mistaken understanding of a typo in Kitvei Arizal. Now, there are twice that in Kitvei Arizal it speaks about this in Shara Kavanot and Pri Etz Chaim, and the right girsa, and again, this is something that Rav Yaakov Hillel wrote a sefer on the Inyanim of Lag BaOmer. It's called Ed Hagal Hazeh, and in that sefer he proves that the proper girsa is not Yom Shemet Bo Rabbi Shlomo Yochai, the day that Rabbi Shlomo Yochai passed away, but it is a chet, one little letter missing there as a typo. It's Yom Simchat Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's the day of happiness of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's perhaps the day that the smicha to the Talmidim happened, and so on. He was allowed to be musmach and be a teacher in Klal Yisrael. But nevertheless, Rebbi Shimon definitely changed the worldview of many things by authoring Sefer Zohar, right? We generally speaking assume that Sefer Zohar is authored by Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, even though that some 250 years ago, this was a very heated debate among some of the Chachmei Israel. The Maran Chida already writes about this in his Sefer Shem HaGedolim, discussing why is it that Sefer Zohar for over 1,000 years was not found. We didn't have it. It was found some 700 years ago in the time of Talmidei HaRashba. All of a sudden, after 1,000 years of not being there, and then you have difficulties with Sefer Zohar because you find the names of later Tanaim and even the names of some of the Amoraim and some of the Geonim in Sefer Zohar. So how in the world is it possible for Zohar to be authored by Rabbi Shimon Yochai? And this became a tumult to the degree that, partially also because of what Zohar HaKadosh was used throughout the generations in the wrong hands and became a tool of destruction by Shabtai Tzvi Machshemo and his Talmidim in school of a fellow 2 generations later, known as Yaakov Frank, Shem Reshaim Yirkav, that many thousands, we're talking about tens of thousands of people went astray, and their lives were destroyed because of the misleading properties of so-called fake Mekubalim. And this became a very hypersensitive issue to the degree that you find, Rabbi Yaakov Amden, literally chased down the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, because he also was a clean-shaven young individual that at age 13 he already was writing Camillos and writing a second set of Zohar, and so it was a larger-than-life figure. Now, obviously, for us, the Ramchal is Kodesh Kodashim and accepted across the board of the Jewish literatures for both for Hashkafa, Musar, Kabbalah, and all of his other works as well. But at the time, he was literally put in cherem, and at the end he ran away with his family because of the pressure and because of the force that was put upon him. And he went to Eretz Yisrael. He unfortunately passed away. He died with his family of malaria there in Eretz Yisrael. He was not alone. Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz, if you would have the twin towers of Achronim in talent of young individuals, Ramchal and Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz, and he was also with Maram Chachiz tremendously pressured and chased down because of his gravitation towards Kabbalah. So, be as it may, Rabbi Shimon definitely changed the view of world. We have to talk a little bit about Rabbi Shimon, right? And the Sefer HaZohar. Now, obviously, we all know the Gemara in Daf Lamed Gimel Masechet Shabbat. It's easy to remember, right? Simple to remember.com. It's is right over here. That Lag BaOmer Daf Lamed Gimel Masechet Shabbat is the story of Rabbi Shimon and how he was outspoken against the Romans, and he was basically sentenced to death, and he had to run away with his son, Rabbi Lazar, who was his partner in crime, so to speak, and they went to a cave for 12 years. They came out. They had to go back in for another year, subtotal of 13 years in Me'arab. And actually, the Baal Tanya writes that he was not learning Zohar in those 13 years. He was learning Pshat. He was learning Abaye V'Rava. It was like Havayot, the Abaye V'Rava. He was learning Pshat, But his greatness became a different level. So I want to give you a thought process that I had, and then I found it in the writings of the Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, Abba Shalom, in his Divrei Yoel and Parashat Vayeshev. He writes basically what I said many years ago, but some 20 years ago, I had a problem. Normally speaking, halakha is not like Rebbi Shimon in most of the things in Shas, right? In Shabbat and Eruvin, halakha surprisingly is like Rebbi Shimon. Now in Klarei Psak, you don't find such a thing. You don't have. You have Klalim, Rabbi Meir v'chavero halakha kechavero, Rabbi Meir v'Rabbi Yehuda halakha keRabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda v'chavero halakha keRabbi Yehuda. Now we have that type of thing. Generally speaking, a thread that goes through Shas. Rabbi Shimon, halakha is not like him. Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Shimon halakha is like Rabbi Yehuda, right? But when it comes to the halachot of Shabbat and Eruvin, all of a sudden halakha is like Rabbi Shimon, right? So this is something that bothered me, and I wanted to suggest that before the Me'ara and after the Me'ara was different, right? Rabbi Shimon, before he went, because the Gemara there says in Masechet Shabbat that when he came out of the cave after 13 years, his father-in-law, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, you're sounding Gemara, father-in-law, generally speaking, assumed as his father-in-law, took him to bath. To take care of him. Imagine a person that didn't take a bath for 13 years, and not only that, he only had one pair of garments, and he kept it for Shabbatot. So he had dug himself a hole, and his son, to the neck. They were in the ground, covering themselves with the ground, learning Torah the entire day. In that way, to keep their thing for Kavod Shabbat, and so on. But that's made details aside. And he sees his entire skin is cracked up open with bruises, and he starts tearing, the salty tears pouring on the back of Rabbi Shimon and starts burning. He said, "What are you doing?" He says, I'm crying. Woe to me that I see you like this. He says, "No, ashrecha shereitani bekach." He says, on the contrary, fortunate you are that. Because if you didn't see me like this, you would understand. You don't understand how I got this. It was not hocus pocus. It was not that I went to Meron and all of a sudden I became a Talmid Chacham, right? So I worked hard. And the Gemara says, before he went to the Me'ara, whenever Rabbi Shimon had difficulties, who would he ask it to? Rabbi Chas ben Yair had 12 different ways of answering every question. But after he came back from the Me'ara, not only he never needed to ask anything from Rabbi Chas ben Yair, but now Rabbi Chas ben Yair, when he had questions, he would ask Rabbi Shimon, and he would ask him not one answer, not 12 answers, but 24 answers, right? A tremendous, tremendous level, right? So perhaps you could say it was different. Now, I won't tell you a little thing. I know we're past time, but you don't have to feel into this, so it's easier to go over time a little bit. The Bet Yosef says the mitzvah of Gidan Hashem. We all know that's asur to eat Gidan Hashem. Right? The Ashkenazim now in America, you can't even find the back half, of the hindquarters of an animal, because they just sell it to the goyim. They never even take it. They don't want to risk many of the delicious dishes you can't even find in America, because we don't want to deal with Gidan Hashem. Now, not dealing with Gidan Hashem is really actually machloket rishonim. If Gidan Hashem is asur b'hana'ah or is only asur b'achila, right? This is one of the maybe 24 or so differences between Rambam and Chachmei Lunil, right? There's letters back and forth between Rambam and Chachmei Lunil. So Rambam held that Gidan Hashem is only asur b'achila. Chachmei Lunil held that Gidan Hashem is asur not just b'achila but also b'hana'ah. Okay? So Bet Yosef writes in your Das Masechet. So I understand the Rambam. I understand Chachmei Lunil, because this is actually a machloket in the Gemara, machloket Tanaim. It's machloket Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda holds that Gidan Hashem is asur b'achila. Rabbi Shimon holds Gidan Hashem is asur b'hana'ah. And Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon in Klalei Ora'ah, Rabbi Yehuda. So Rambam is following Klalei Ora'ah. What does Chachmei Lunil do? This is Maran's question in Bet Yosef. Then says Maran, I said, I know why. Because I found later in Zohar HaKadosh that the Zohar writes that Gidan Hashem is asur b'hana'ah. Not only it is asur b'achila, says the Zohar, but it is asur b'hana'ah. So Chachmei Lunil are following the Zohar. Writes the holy Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ramah, in his Hagaot, of Darkei Moshe on Bet Yosef. He says, I don't understand. Maybe somebody could help me over here. Because Shamati, I heard that the author of Zohar HaKadosh is none other than Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Again, we started speaking about the whole machloket that existed in the Abetz, was the one chasing down Ramchal. He actually wrote an entire, he had his own publishing house, so he could publish whatever he wrote. Half the things he wrote, he would not be published if he didn't own the publishing house. It's very radical and interesting personality. He wrote a whole sefer that was put immediately to Cherem, called Mitpachat Svarim, against Zohar HaKadosh. It's like, oh, not for now. But nevertheless, so I heard the author of the Zohar is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So Chazak Baruch is the same Stam Rabbi Shimon in Shas is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So you want to say that because it's Zohar is Rabbi Shimon. So it's the same person. So says the Satmar of Rabbi Yoel Taitman in Masechet Vayeshev in Divrei Yoel. He says no. What's in Zohar is very different than what you find in Shas, because Zohar was written after he came out of the Me'ara. And after that, all the Klalei Orah that you have, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, it's before he went in. After he came back from the Me'ara, Malachai is like Rabbi Shimon in everything, right? And that's what he says. He actually, not the way that I wanted to suggest, but there's a sefer called Ben Yochai, obviously talking about the Rabbi Shimon Yochai, and he writes that any time in Shas that it says Rabbi Shimon, not Rabbi Shimon Stam Rabbi Shimon is Rabbi Shimon Yochai, but it says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it's indicating in Shas itself that this happened after he came from the Me'ara. And he says, if you pay attention, this machloket of Gid Anaseh, Gemara says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So in Halakha, it's like Rabbi Shimon, like the Zohar HaKadosh in that way. So that would be an answer for Chachmei Lunil in that way. But again, there's a lot of Rabbi Shimon's history and beautiful rate bites that we missed. We haven't even covered what I had typed up here to mention. But Zat Hashem maybe in the next year. Chazak Baruch.